series hosted by Owando PLC. I'm Folu Storms, and I will be your moderator for this Millennial conversation, which is on the future of energy. Now, before I carry on, I'm going to give you a few quick housekeeping things to note. Do remember that you can stay connected and keep this conversation going. The conversation is streaming live on YouTube. You can search with the hashtag #AMillennialConversation, but you can also find this conversation and others like it from the past over on Instagram at Owando_PLC. On YouTube, you can find LinkedIn and Facebook as Owando PLC. There is a LinkedIn group as well, a Millennial Conversation, which offers members a chance to interact with like-minded professionals who seek to become change makers in their respective communities and spaces. So every time we have this conversation, we have to address why Owando is having these conversations. Because for Owando, conversations like these help in empowering current and future generations. They also challenge us all to think and act differently while striving to impact our future. You see, Owando has also been involved in building capacity over the years, including collaborating with communities, universities, and tech hubs from the World Economic Forum Global Shapers and various universities across the continent. And two, there are over about 4,000 youth that have benefited from the skills acquisitions program that Owando have established with their joint venture partners, that is NNPC and NAOC, within the host communities, amongst others. And now we get into the conversation itself. You see, according to the Africa Energy Outlook 2019, the number of people living in Africa's cities is expected to increase by 600 million over the next 2 decades. That's a very high number. In fact, this is much higher than the increase that was experienced by China's cities during the country's 20-year economic and energy boom. In fact, Africa's overall population is set to exceed 2 billion before 2040, and that accounts for at least half of the global increase over that period. So these profound changes will drive the continent's economic growth, the infrastructure development on the continent, and in turn, the energy demand, which is projected to rise about 60% to 1,320 million tons of oil equivalent in 2040. And that's all based on the current policies and plans. So what does that mean? It means that this calls for a rapid increase in supply on the continent, to which all forms of energy must contribute in the decades ahead. Africa, therefore, has a unique opportunity to pursue sustainable energy development as a basis for long-term prosperity, all right? So in today's conversation, my dear millennials and people of other generations, we will be discussing what energy mix just might ensure that the continent meets its own power demands, how it might bring development to rural areas, spur industrial growth, and support increased prosperity across the continent as a whole. To join me in this conversation today and to drive the discussion, we have 4 incredibly knowledgeable and impactful individuals in the energy sector. And I will start off with Olaedo Osaka, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Daystar Power in West Africa. It is a renewable energy company that helps businesses in West Africa to bridge the power gap with solar hybrid systems and innovative financing solutions. So Ola has led the company's expansion in West Africa, excluding Nigeria, into Ghana, Togo, and Senegal. And the company has installed and currently operates approximately 250 sites across West Africa and has an installed power capacity of over 24 megawatts. Up next, we have Ms. Linda Mabena Olagunju. She is the founder and managing director of DLO Energy Resources Group Limited. Now, the company currently owns and operates one of Africa's largest wind farms with a combined capacity of 244 megawatts. Now, these projects were also awarded excellent projects in 2014 by the South African Wind Energy Association. In addition to its portfolio, the company also has 55 megawatt solar PV projects currently under development in South Africa and Nigeria. So thank you for joining us, Linda. Thank you for joining us, Ola. We've also got with us Femi Adeyemo. Now, Femi is the founder and chief executive officer for Arnergy. It is a Bill Gates affiliated venture-backed distributed utility that provides energy reliability to residential, commercial, and industrial customers in Nigeria. Now, Femi led Arnergy to complete a $9 million equity capital injection from 4 tier 1 global investors. Our energy enables SMEs and economic clusters run sustainably by providing reliable and affordable uninterrupted electricity with rooftop solar solutions. Welcome, Femi. Thank you for joining us. And we've got Adaku Ufere, who is an award-winning energy attorney working at the intersection of energy, gender, and development, with extensive experience leading multicultural and multilingual teams in the structuring, negotiation, and implementation of energy projects in Africa. Adaku is the Deputy Chief of Party of USAID-funded Power Africa West Africa Energy Program. It is a Power Africa initiative that seeks to expand supply of and access to affordable, reliable, grid-connected electricity services in West and Central Africa. And Adaku manages the daily operations and the project management office for the WAEP across 23 countries in West and Central Africa. So big welcome to all of you. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to start off our first discussion, actually, because for everyone who's joining us, this is going to go in a series of about 20 minutes with each speaker, and each speaker will come on. They're going to talk to us about a number of issues, and then you guys can send in your questions to us. So please feel free to use the question box over here and send us whatever questions it is you have, but I will also indicate when that is time. So let me start off with my conversation with Olaido Osoka, who is the CEO of Daystar Power Ghana. How are you doing?
Hi, Folu. I'm well, thanks. Thank you for moderating this, and thanks to Orlando for inviting me on behalf of Daystar Power.
Yes, thank you for joining us. So let's jump straight into the conversation. We have no time to waste. The first thing, right, is that Ghana has been able to significantly turn around their power sector. So can you talk us a little bit through that and what that's like from your perspective?
Sure, and maybe it's great if we take a step back and speak of context, right? So when we talk about energy on the continent, we're generally looking at two kinds of scenarios. One is a scenario where the grid is readily available, which Ghana has sort of made good progress towards. And the second scenario is a scenario like Nigeria, right, where there's still heavy reliance on diesel generators. I think Ghana has been a bit successful in terms of increasing energy access because they've been very intentional around building their transmission lines, but also having a very concrete plan towards increasing the use and scale of renewables in the country.
All right. Thank you very much for that. That's context is quite important. So a World Economic Forum article gives 12 reasons why Africa ruling out natural gas will do far more harm than good on environmental, health, and developmental fronts. It does also highlight that gas has a pivotal role to play in Africa's transition to clean energy. And I know people always talk about clean energy, including the fact that the continent has a significant natural gas resources. And there is this concern that a ban or halt on gas could slow the adoption of renewables. There could be poverty reduction and reinforce global energy double standards. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, understanding that obviously, gas is not really your area, but how do you feel about that?
I think generally in Africa, but also in the broader context of where the world is moving, the future of energy is a patchwork of multiple sources of energy, right? Primarily, it's a future where there's heavy reliance on renewable energy. So moving away from the traditional coal, oil, and biomass, right? So wood and charcoal that we've seen our economies use towards more sort of sustainable energy. So with renewable energy playing a key role and with it becoming more efficient and cheaper, we still need other options, right? Because renewables are intermittent. So for example, what do we do when it's a rainy day or where it's nighttime and you have a solar plant? You need an alternative. And if you compare natural gas to coal, oil and gas, which for example, oil in particular, right, Nigeria is super reliant on, natural gas is the most environmentally friendly. And from a supply perspective, you're absolutely right. There are significant resources. I think we have enough supply on the continent to supply more than 2/3 of the world's demand for 20 years, right? So wow. If even look at a cost perspective, gas turbines are cheaper and modular if you compare them to coal or nuclear or hydropower stations. And again, they're less polluting. So when we're thinking about an energy mix, right, it's moving from the traditional polluting and expensive sources towards cleaner energy sources like renewables, but it's also remembering that it's a patchwork of multiple sources, and natural gas is in supply, is cost effective, and is, at the end of the day, from an environmental perspective, more sustainable than the alternatives. And I guess what we're seeing, right, you spoke earlier about how the population is growing. With that comes an increase in demand of energy, right? And I think it can really coexist with being environmentally conscious and cutting emissions. I mean, if we're talking about sustainable growth, that is the only way to grow sustainably. And this is something that we're passionate about in Daystar, right? So for us, it's thinking about how can we, for our businesses and industries, have a mix that's designed to be cost effective, right? But also designed to reduce emissions. And that's our primary offering. And we're currently at a point where the financials make sense. In the last 10 years, renewables have reduced costs by 70%, right? So you can save money and you can sort of reduce your emissions at the same time. If you couldn't save money, perhaps then it'd be unrealistic to expect people to sort of transition.
Yes, because that is a big concern, I think, even for the average person, and a lot of people that are going to be watching this conversation, is there is this impression that the cost of renewables is just astronomical. So they're like, please, let me be burning my, my diesel and stuff. Let's do that. So it is quite interesting to educate people and to let them know that things have changed and how it's changed.
Absolutely. And if I can just actually jump in there, right? So if you go, I'm from Abia State originally, right? If you go to my village, right, cooking is still primarily done by firewood, right? There are parts of the country that don't have grid access, that don't have mini grids, right? So there is that reality that currently exists. And part of why I think there's been a slow transition to cleaner sources is because cost is a barrier, right? But I guess it's helpful for people to know that, well, if you look at a company like Daystar, we are financing the solutions for businesses, right? So there's no upfront cost. We finance it, we design it, we install it, and we reduce your costs by, in some cases, up to 30% over time.
That's phenomenal. Thank you very much for chipping in and saying that. So with a predominantly young population, a future of energy on the continent does lie in the hands of the youth. So what role do you think that young Africans can play in delivering energy solutions to the continent? And how has this inspired you to action? Because you're a young African doing some phenomenal things on a scale that most people would be gobsmacked by. I certainly am.
Thanks, Folu. I mean, I think this is a very critical point, right? I was reading a McKinsey study that said around 80 million young people on the continent are either in vulnerable employment, and about 110 million don't contribute economically to their countries, right? So we have a huge young demographic, and I think that's really critical, and so far largely untapped towards sort of transitioning in the energy space. I think perspective is helpful, right? Because ultimately, the renewable energy sector employs 11 million people in the world, right? This was as at 2018. So there's a huge opportunity in terms of, as renewable is scaling, creating jobs and improving livelihoods. And at Daystar, part of what we're doing, I'm not a unicorn, right? We are enabling and empowering young people with the skill set to design, to install, to operate, to maintain, and generally participate in what we believe is the future of energy. We now have a team of about 100 people. So this is small, really, in the context of the problem we're looking to solve. But I think in terms of the role the youth must play in enabling this future, it's, rolling your sleeves and getting in the trenches, right? There's work to be done. We're seeing how this is very quickly accelerating. So it's for us to sort of roll up our sleeves and jump in.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Speaking of jumping in, I know there are people out there that have their hands up a little bit and they want to join in and ask questions. Please do use the Q&A box to ask any questions that you have. I'm going to chip in. This one is kind of an interesting one and says, well, how do we address the energy question of fusing policy, operation, and regulation to conform with global practices? And I'm sure that must be a challenge in different countries. So that's a very interesting one. I'd love for you to address that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at building an industry, you need the enabling regulatory framework, right? So if you start with that, I think if you look particularly in West Africa, we are seeing some strides being made in terms of defining policies that attract investments, that attract developers. If you look at Nigeria, for example, the licensing regime, I think, really only kicks in after 1 megawatt. So there are different policies in place. If you look in Ghana also, for example, you see that there are custom exemptions you can get, right, to reduce the cost of your offering. So we're starting to see some traction. Again, there's so much more work to be done, because ultimately investors only go where they feel comfortable in being able to recoup their investment. They only go where they feel the government is enabling industries, right? So I think there's so much work to be done, but it's encouraging to see already the steps that have been taken. And it's very interesting sort of navigating the different countries and the different policies in place towards enabling the transition.
Okay, so bringing it back to the young people and empowering young people across the continent, what opportunities that exist in the energy value chain, or what are those opportunities, in your opinion, that young people can tap into? And how can they scale through some of these barriers to entry, like lack of funding? Because it does seem to be quite capital intensive in some situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I take a step back actually and say the main barrier to entry is actually fear of the unknown and new things. Which is something that anyone looking to enter the industry primarily has to overcome. So, because ultimately we're used to, growing up in Nigeria now, you're used to hearing the sound of generator, you're used to seeing oil and gas is where you're supposed to be. And there's sometimes a fear of, okay, well, if I transition, how do I fit in? What can I do, right? So I guess I used to be a lawyer 6 years ago. The only thing I knew about renewables was that it was cleaner and maybe it could reduce the headache from generators, right? Now I'm the CEO of one of the key players in the industry. And I say that in all humility and hope it encourages someone listening, because it's a relatively nascent industry and the learning is lifelong and you can learn too. And I think the beauty of working in such an industry that's burgeoning is that there's so much upside and you get sort of first movers advantage from coming in. Then if you're looking specifically at the sorts of opportunities, you can design, which is something we do in-house, you can install, you can learn how to operate, you can learn how to maintain. There are also opportunities in general management, right? Finance, law. I didn't study engineering, right? I didn't study renewables, but it's a learning process. So there are different sort of buckets you can fit into. If you're looking to be an entrepreneur, right, and sell these systems, perhaps that's where funding could be a barrier. But to that, I'd say if we look at the data, there's money coming in and just looking for where the viable companies, where the bankable companies this money can go to. 2020, about 148 million of venture capital in Africa went to off-grid technology. So venture capital is, of course, very early stage, right? So that to me shows that, well, there's 148 million that's looking for young companies, yeah, possibly led by young founders that are looking, right? Daystar raised 48 million. We've only been here for 4 years. Energy also raised money, right? So there is financing. Just start lifelong learning, and there's so many resources out there, and there is room. There is so much room for you to join the industry.
I love that. So many important things. Fear of the unknown. That's what's holding us back. So people stop being afraid. Just do it. You know, look across the value chain. There's a lot going on there. I do love that. Let's see. So I mean, you have touched on a few of these things, but what other advice do you have for African millennials that are looking to provide lasting solutions to Africa's energy predicament? Because, I mean, I can only speak for Nigeria because this is, you know, the place I know best. I mean, just looking across the board, it does feel very overwhelming. It does feel kind of hopeless. Like, how can people help? How can they help?
I think in the first place, right, what I'd say is get as much information as possible. I think that we're living in a time where this is freely accessible. So there are a lot of platforms, the International Renewable Energy Agency, REN21, GIZ, free online courses that sort of give perspective and give you more information and make you more knowledgeable about what's happening in the industry, right? That's one thing. Another thing is sort of finding mentors. Now, that seems daunting, but actually there are networks already existing that are looking for people to join. For example, if you're a woman in energy, right, the Awedi network is a brilliant example. The International Finance Corporation has an Energy to Equal program that's looking to increase and attract more talent in the industry. So it's thinking about, okay, what are the already existing platforms I can tap into and leverage, right? And those are there. How much information can I get? So I'm speaking from an informed perspective. And then once that's the case, take a leap. We're young, shoot your shot. You don't get shots that you don't shoot, right? And just remembering that, it could be daunting, right? A lot of times you're taking little steps and it seems like it's too small. But I think I'd say, just be intentional and focus on the long term, because we're running a marathon, not sprints, right? And everybody has their pace, and just have some grit. We're challenging the status quo. It's not easy. We need to persevere. We need to just see things through, but there is space. There's space for you to participate.
I love that. Thank you. I'm going to jump to some of the questions because they're coming in. So guys, do keep sending in your questions. The Q&A box is open. Afolabi Williams says he would like to know how the transmission lines in Ghana were improved. Was it decentralized transmission, improved technology, and how can that be replicated in other countries?
Okay, I think one thing to mention, right, is scale. So if you look at Ghana in the context of Nigeria, it's to some degree a bit unfair, because at the end of the day, the population in Ghana is the population in Lagos, right? That's one thing to start with. So from that perspective, when you're thinking that, okay, well, it's a sort of smaller scale in comparison to the large scale problem Nigeria faces, it's really one around making the investment right. Again, if it's a smaller population, the investment required is also not as large as the scale of the investment required in Nigeria. So one is actually investment. Two is actually bringing in experts and acknowledging the gaps that you have in your understanding, in your capacity, in your technology, right? And being open to that. Number three is really around diversifying, right? So Ghana is not without its challenges, but I think one thing they have been good at so far is sort of collaborating with broader, larger, and more advanced countries in terms of technology and support, but also some degree being open-minded. Again, it's not without its challenges, but I think this kind of approach has helped to some degree in terms of where Ghana finds itself now.
Thank you. All right. Collaboration is key as well. And also just recognizing scale. Scale affects a lot of things, my people. It affects a lot of things. Abdul Malik Badamasui, sorry if I mispronounce your name, asks, so what are the key steps to address the separation of operation and in the Nigerian context, and NPC, for example, from regulation to the DPR, etc., to create acceptable global practice? Is that something that you want to touch on?
I think ultimately, right, I'm going to indirectly answer the question. And I guess hopefully the other panelists who are based in Nigeria and operate in the Nigerian market can do more justice to this question. I'm based in Ghana and look at our business outside of Nigeria. But I think ultimately, in terms of looking at Nigeria's challenges, historically, there's been a huge reliance on oil, right? Currently, from a cost perspective, that is not really sustainable. Right. So whatever approach we're looking to take as a country, it needs to be one that's driven by fundamentals. And the fundamentals are that increasingly renewables are cheaper, right? Two, driven by the scale of the challenge you're trying to address. If you have most people relying on charcoal, relying on other unsafe methods of producing energy, or for example, 10 billion liters of diesel a year, that has its health challenges and impact on livelihoods, right? So I think we generally need to take a step back and think about what are we trying to build and what is best capable of taking us there. And I think that to some degree involves looking beyond and outside of NMPC, right, towards sort of private sector and the technologies that are coming up outside of oil and gas.
Okay. I think Taiwo Koka, who's up next to the question, is coming a little bit late, but asked something that I feel you've touched on, if you would again kindly, says, I know nothing about renewable energy, so how can I learn? Where do I begin?
Welcome. As I said earlier, like I knew nothing 5 years ago, right, except headache and clean. So where do you begin? Google. I know it sounds innocuous, but literally go on Google, check a platform called Irena, check a platform called Rent21, Google renewable online courses, Google State of Africa Energy, right? Because before you know, context and history, I think is important towards defining the future, right? So take a look, take back and look back, right? And where do you go? Google. Look for also networks, right? I mentioned earlier the AWEDI network, that's AWEDI. Check out also the International Finance Corporation's Energy to Equal program. I'm sure when Adaku speaks as well, she will have amazing insight about the platforms that exist to bridge sort of the knowledge gap.
Thank you very much for that. I see somebody in the general chat saying provide the resources, just mention the chat box. Don't worry, once this is done, you can go back and watch this video. So it'll be nice. It'll be like refreshing. So do that, click, help us with the views. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Razak Ogunfui jumps in and says, well, in your opinion, what is that right energy mix that could help a country like Nigeria reduce the energy deficit that we are currently experiencing?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a bit more complicated to say, okay, X% of renewables, X% of coal, X% of oil and gas, right? I think that is a bit impractical. But I think the broader consideration in terms of what a right energy mix is moving away from coal and oil towards renewables. So more of solar, right? More of natural gas for when solar is not available, or when there's no wind to push the wind turbines, right? Having an alternative source in that period that's not diesel generators, right? So to answer your question, in my opinion, what is the right mix? It is less of polluting oil and coal and more of renewables. In a country, this will vary, right? Even in Nigeria, if you look at Nigeria specifically, I don't think that we can say, oh, this is X% that we need currently, right? It's more complicated than that. People in the village who you can't force to get solar because they can't even afford it, right? So it's embracing the general notion that we need to start a journey, we need to walk away from our past and towards our future that's cleaner.
Thank you very much. Away from our past and into a cleaner future. A cleaner future. That gives me goosebumps. And we've got a lengthy submission here from Atimi Fashonu, but we do have time, so I'm going to read that for you. She says, or he says, my contribution is this: as a young female in this space, the role of academia cannot be neglected in driving the core of this discussion, because what we find today brewing in the academia is a crop of young researchers like myself, says Atimi, that are passionate about solving problems in the energy space by creating theories that work in our unique context, because we believe that theory is what guides practice and policy. We do not create these theories by just classroom or textbook knowledge. We are quite abreast of the industry and governance relevance to our research. So we are so willing to partner with the industry and government, starting with the panelists in this discussion, to do what needs to be done. It says, this discussion has been amazing so far. I look forward to the rest of it. So Atimi, they're plugging herself. I like it. I like it. So, I mean, what do you think about the role of academia and research and how that's sort of helping and informing how young people are moving energy-wise on the continent?
Yeah, I think it's critical, right? Because at the end of the day, we need to be making informed decisions. We can't make informed decisions without data that comes from research, right? So I think in the first place, that's one of the fundamental building blocks in terms of helping young people understand where they fit in, but also helping our economies understand the impact of our history on the status quo, as well as where we need to be going. So I think it's critical. And I think as we speak about the transition and cleaner sources of energy, there are many key players, right? So they're operating companies like myself, right? Or Daystar Power, there are financiers, there's a place for research, right? They're all these buckets that shouldn't be working in silos, but should be. That's why I love that Owando is doing this, right? Because it's just possible to sit back and say, I play in oil and gas, and this is why I'm going to make my bed and lie on it. But actually, there is so much room for collaboration, and that's exactly what we need to sort of get to where we need to be.
I love that we've mentioned collaboration a few times, and it is true that the reason Owando has these conversations is to try and get all of us to not just think, but work a little bit more together. But I will throw a little bit of a spanner in the works here, as collaborating for young people seems to be collaborating in general, I find, seems to be a bit of a challenge. People are concerned with trust issues. So if a young Atemi shows up and is like, well, we've done this research, what are the ways in which young people can kind of scale that hurdle of trust, that hurdle of, well, I don't really know that person, where they're coming from. These are real issues, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's fair enough, right? We're all human beings, but I think in the first place, you need to be willing to take risks, right? So, and also I think you need to manage your expectations. I have many colleagues that I met on LinkedIn, for instance. If they'd never sent me a message on LinkedIn, and perhaps I couldn't have responded, right? There's that. But if they had never sent me a message, if they never took that shot, they probably wouldn't be working here now, right? So I think you need to be willing to be vulnerable to some degree. Of course, take calculated risks, but take risks. You have to step out of your comfort zone. Some people will break your trust. It's the reality of life. But I think in those sort of situations, right, that's when we build character. That's when we're able to get back up and also pay it forward by mentoring other people, right? So I encourage you, don't set out to walk on eggshells, but actually set out to aim for beyond the skies, with the knowledge that, look, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to fail, your legs are going to hurt from running, but you pick yourself up and you get back up, so take risks. People are going to break your trust. C'est la vie. It's life.
Is life. Is take calculated risk. Take calculated risk. I love that. Thank you for that. Just a note to everybody out there watching, thank you for joining us. This is a conversation, a millennial conversation on the future of energy. I have Olaido. Olaido, did I pronounce your surname correctly?
No, you didn't, but it's okay. So it's Osaka. So it's not Japan.
It's not Osaka. Okay. Osaka. There you go. I knew it. I'm here for you, girl. Osaka. Okay. Got it. Olaido is the CEO of Daystar Power West Africa, and she's been sharing some phenomenal insights with us on the mix of energy that we could use, on how people can get into the industry, because as she has given us her background, she was a lawyer who didn't know anything about renewables, and now, how many years later, look at her. And we've got an anonymous attendee who is asking, for those who want to emulate your path, rising to leadership early. Yinka says, for those who want to transition also from law into energy in the industry, I feel like you've addressed this already, but what again would you like to say to them? Because clearly people are popping in all the way through this conversation, so it would be good to catch them up.
Yeah, sure. I think maybe something I hadn't said before, right? Look, I think if you're a lawyer, if you're in human resources, it's realizing the value that you bring to the table in any industry. Right? So what is your skill set? Because that is probably generally transferable. So when you can acknowledge and understand the value you bring to the table, let's forget the technical experience for a second, because I assume you don't have that. But again, it's a new industry. We're all learning. It's continuous. So in the first place, I think articulate what your value is and reach out to companies. Yeah, even if you don't see an opening, say, oh, hi, this is what I've done in the past. This is the skills that I think could be relevant for you. I would like to participate in your company because this, right? So I think that's a very practical step to take. So first of all, understand what you bring to the table. 2, read, go on Google, get as much information as possible, and then position yourself, right? Finally, shoot your shots. You can position yourself, but if you never take a shot, you may never get anything, right? So shoot your shot. Let's use the tools that we have available, LinkedIn, Google, etc., to contribute to the transition.
I love it. We're coming up to the final couple of minutes with Ola as a panelist. I mean, she'll be lurking in the background somewhere. I'm just kind of watching and chatting. And up next, we will be talking with Linda. But this final couple of questions, we have Ayo Alakija, who says, what is Daystar doing in terms of their corporate social responsibility? Are there any interventions done to eradicate unemployment and things of that nature?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. So what are we doing? A couple of things, right? And I wouldn't really call it our corporate social responsibility. I think it's our ethos. It's at the heart of the kind of company we want to be. And one thing we're doing there is trying to create opportunities, for developing the skills of young people generally, but 2, focusing specifically on empowering women. I think I'm a testament to that, right? But beyond me, if I look at my broader team, for example, around 45% of the team are women, right? If I look at our leadership, almost half of our leadership team is female. And so in terms of what we're doing, we're going beyond the existing pipeline that we have to look for talent. When we put jobs in initially, we find that women weren't applying. So what we started doing was going earlier on in the value chain to schools to say, oh, hey, these are the opportunities that exist. Do you know that this is what you can do? Do you know that this could be your future? These are examples of other people doing it, right? So it's creating that pipeline, but also building people that have the skills and have the opportunities to lead. So there are different ways to lead, right? But we don't really want people to just say, oh, tick, this is a woman, right? But we want women in leadership positions. We want women making decisions, leading teams, and really contributing on senior levels to the transition. And that's something that's at the heart, I think, of what we believe in Daystar.
Ola, thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you very much for answering these questions. So interestingly and usefully. Thank you so much. We are going to move on now. I'm sure Ola will still be in the background. Guys, don't worry. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening now. So do keep the questions coming. Up next, we have Miss Linda Mabena Olagunju. She is the founder and managing director of DLO Energy Energy Resources Group Limited, and it is a company that currently owns and operates one of Africa's largest wind farms with a combined capacity of 244 megawatts. Linda, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be on this platform with you.
Excellent. I think everyone is very excited. So I'm going to jump straight into the questions. How do you see the energy transition from fossil fuels occurring on the African continent? Let's start with that.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a complicated question, and I have to unpack the reasons why. When the world is talking about moving on to clean energy, it's important to take into account where we currently are as a continent, where power generation in any form, whether clean or dirty, is limited. And I'll use an example of South Africa and Nigeria to highlight the thing I'm trying to say. Nigeria currently has an estimated population of 201 million, right? And its current power generation sits at approximately 12,500 megawatts. South Africa has a population of 55 million, and its power generation currently sits at least about 58,000 megawatts. So you understand that power in any way generated is a huge concern. South Africa is currently experiencing rolling blackouts due to a lack of capacity. So even with that 58,000 plus megawatts of power, we are having major power issues in the country. Nigeria, which is obviously a larger economy and a larger population, is what I call, the power sector is almost non-existent in the way in which it should be servicing the community at a large scale. And now we drop down to look at the current energy mix in both countries. South Africa's main source, even with our renewable energy program, remains coal. So 67% of our electricity in South Africa comes from coal, and only 7% comes from renewable energy. And I'm talking here grid connected, meaning the one that goes through the state-owned utilities. I'm not talking about the off-grid and distributed power sector. Nigeria's power comes from 82% of it is oil and gas resources. So when you look at the current situation in Africa, it's clear that power in any form in which it's generated remains a huge issue. How do we address this issue? For me, it's the seriousness of governments in Africa to actually put policies in place to back alternative power generation. On the continent, power has been centralized. It's been run by state-owned utilities. Nigeria underwent a major, one of the world's most complicated privatization program. However, we have not seen the real results of that program, because whilst there was a policy change to an extent, there wasn't the government backing financially to make the projects bankable. As the previous speaker said, investors come into a country, they want to invest, but they want to make sure that their investment is going to yield returns. Currently, the framework in Nigeria doesn't provide for that. So when you're talking about power, I think it's very important to take one step back and say, how does Africa move from this notion that power needs to be centralized and enter into a decentralized power system whereby there can be generation of power by private sector players as well? One thing we realize is that governments all across the continent are failing at providing power to the citizens in the manner in which they are required to. And the result of that is it affects the economy. It affects us on a day-to-day basis. As you say, in Nigeria, almost everyone has a generator. Unfortunately, South Africans were so spoiled, we always had power. We are now looking at how we have a backup generator or a system over and above the state utility. So the first thing for me starts with government's seriousness about actually allowing the sector to grow outside of its own control.
Okay, so do you then see us realistically being able to meet the demand for the continent's the continent's energy demand by 2050, which is a goal? And if so, what would that ideal energy mix look like?
I do, if there can be the right political steps taken. So for example, our president only this week, after 10 years of lobbying, has allowed South African private power producers to produce electricity up to 100 megawatts for private users, meaning for large industrials as well as mines. Once you take off the pressure from the state utility, from the big clients, and allow private sector to assist in off-burdening the load of power generation for these large consumers of power, then you open up the grid for it to actually even supply to the domestic market. Nigeria still sits, unfortunately, at the policy, and I mean, the Nigerians on this call can correct me, but from my last look at this, you guys are not allowed to generate power for yourselves above 1 megawatt, unless the laws have changed more recently. And that is the showstopper. Secondly, once the privatization in Nigeria happened, what didn't happen, it was the funding of NBET, which is the national bulk buyer of power in Nigeria, meaning if the national bulk buyer, the off-taker is broke, to put it mildly, then no one is going to obviously want to invest in the power sector from a private side. Private sector is about recouping their costs. So for me, it is definitely possible to do so by 2050, but some serious steps would need to be taken. The other key issue for me is saying, and I think this is also for us in the renewable energy space and in the private power space, it is important to take into account that the power generation mix of the country is also predominantly and historically determined by the natural resources available in that country. So if you look at South Africa's gas consumption, it only sits at 2.8%, right? Because we are a country that doesn't have gas. Whereas Nigeria has a huge gas supply, and that's the offset of your oil and gas sector. However, the gas pricing in Nigeria has not been done properly to encourage oil and gas exploration companies to be drilling for the gas, which is a cleaner source than the crude oil, right? So, and also for me, what's important, those countries that have coal, into looking into the clean coal options. I think it's very important to also be honest and say that the key challenge that most governments are facing with the transition to clean power is that the fossil-based model does produce more jobs because of the value chain, from the extraction of the raw material to its actual use in the generation of power. Whilst oil and gas and coal traditionally do that, whilst renewables produce clean power, they produce large numbers of jobs during construction, but those jobs are temporary. When you go on into an operation stage, it is meant to be fewer bodies on the plant. So governments in Africa are facing the challenge of employing their people, having a resource. Remember, that's the resource that most countries also sell. So Nigeria is a very heavy oil and gas country, and then how to try and balance this with the climate change objectives. So it's a delicate negotiation between those two, and also governments need to ensure that their populations are adequately skilled so that they can be absorbed into the new energy future.
Fantastic, Linda. Thank you so much. So much information to deal with there and to take in. We have a quick comment actually on the generating above 1 megawatt. Timishole says that you can generate over 1 megawatt in Nigeria. It's just that as per the EPSRA law of 2005, you need an NERC license once you go above 1 megawatt.
That's the thing, and that's why I'm saying you can't really, the licensing, they frustrate you. So we in South Africa now can generate up to 100 megawatts without a license. In Nigeria, you still need to apply for that license, and it's a very costly and time-consuming process. And 1 megawatt is not going to do anything for a large industrial. If you're looking at your heavy industrial users, they're looking at least a minimum of 50 megawatts of power.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Yes, the license takes a while. Okay, I've got another question for you. At DLO Energy, you do currently operate in South Africa, your home country, and other countries like Botswana and Nigeria. So as a young person in this relatively new sector, how have you been able to maneuver your way into these other markets, as well as prove the importance and viability of your operations?
Well, first off, for me, I'm a Pan-Africanist, and the idea was never just to operate in South Africa. It was always to formulate what I would call Africa's largest wholly female-owned developer in this space, and we're on our way to getting there. And for me, what has been fundamental in that journey is partnerships and finding the right partners in the countries in which we operate, both government as well as private sector. So in Botswana, we found a local company that was already in the space, and we collaborated with them on a tender. We were successful, but unfortunately, as in many other African countries, the government decided to cancel the program and reissue a tender. In Nigeria, we had been looking at Nigeria since about 2010, very complicated market, and we found our niche in the industrial space and in the off-grid space, rather than selling nationally at grid level, at utility scale level to the grid. The issues there being around bankability. So we are developing a 30 megawatt in Kaduna. Unfortunately, the current situation in the country has delayed some of the development of that project, but it's something we're hoping to see through. But in all of these projects, what we did is we found the local partners to work with.
All right, thank you very much. For our viewers out there, do remember that we will be taking your questions in just a bit. Please use the Q&A box. I will get to those questions, and I'm sure Linda will be very happy to address them. In the meantime, I still have questions for her, so I'm going to continue in that direction. So while the energy gap serves as a key barrier to Africa's sustained economic development, it is true that it also presents opportunities for many on the continent. They just need to know where to look. So for young people looking into this space, would you say that energy is lucrative? And what are some of those opportunities that might exist, and the challenges? What should they be prepared for? Should they try to take advantage of those opportunities?
For me, definitely there's a lot of opportunity. And I think we always tend to look at it from being a power producer like myself, which is where I started, meaning I'm a developer. So what I do is, find the land, identify the project, get the consents, the planning, build, own, and produce the power, right? That's the traditional model. What we've obviously started to see and wanted to delve into is actually owning the technology behind the power generation. You find in Africa, we are still using European products, we're still using European technology, and we are still using European companies to effectively build and operate these power projects. And for me, I see that as an opportunity. So the value chain is not only just on the power production, but I think for me, there's a real sweet spot, especially when we're looking at Africa with its young population of people on the technology side of renewables. So one of the things we've recently done is we've acquired a tech and innovation company in this space. And one of the things it does, it tracks when a piece of equipment on a power plant is about to break down, which is one of the largest issues power owners have, is that if you've got a breakdown on site, it can cost you millions of dollars from the off time. So it's almost a predicting tool. So I think it's important for everyone to know that how you get involved in the renewable energy space really depends on where your interest lies. And like the previous speaker said, I didn't study engineering, but it's something I found so interesting that I'm almost self-taught on the job. So the opportunities are there if the people are willing to, see how their skill set can be applied to the sector.
I like that. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a couple of questions and comments from our viewers right now. Priscilla Obi says, but what can we do to reduce the amount of energy being used in Nigeria, or I think to increase, she means, and also can these renewables be used and would they upset the power system balance? I think I had to interpret that a little bit.
So for me, how we can get renewable energy in Nigeria in the most practical form is through the decentralized and distributed energy. If government can allow for private clients and private power producers to generate power, at least up to that 100 megawatts, as South Africa has done, without requiring a generation license, then it would really do a lot to freeing up the grid. But I know that the state tends to be protectionist towards the state utilities and the discos in Nigeria, because the large clients would then be in a position to build their own power stations. And they fear that it would mean the discos would not have enough power. I think the person who was asking the question was asking around grid stability. A lot of investment needs to be done in Nigeria's grid stability, to be quite honest, and that tends to be a situation that's often not spoken about in Nigeria. So sometimes it's not only about the generation capacity. Some of the power that is generated is lost because the grid in Nigeria is not stabilized, is weak, etc., and the power can't be evacuated. So there needs to be massive grid infrastructure investment as well in Nigeria, which is why I think the decentralized system for the users, on site, will also free up some of that pressure off the grid.
Thank you very much for that, Linda. I'm learning so much today. It's fantastic. More questions coming in. We have Alex Aruna, who says, what are the next 15 years for us on the continent? Fossil fuel accelerated extraction, renewable energy focus, or a hybrid, he asks.
Yeah, so many people are saying that oil and gas is at its last end and it's about 15 years out. I mean, look, it really depends. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because Africa has still a huge reliance. In my view, and I mean, as a renewable energy expert, people may say I'm very controversial for this, but I will always speak honestly and in favor of this continent. The West has gotten to industrialize at a rapid rate using these fossil fuels and is now imposing a certain model on Africa. For me, I see a happy marriage between the mix of solar and gas. Battery storage is there. It still remains expensive. The pricing is still going to go down, I'm hoping, in the future as the demand increases. But I think it is not fair to say, for example, countries like Mozambique that have made these significant gas finds that are set to change those economies, to sort of impose a new rule of the game at this stage. I think we have to be practical about our realities. Like I said at the start of my conversation, that we need to look at the fact that the traditional power resources that have been used in different countries have always been informed about the availability of the resource. No one speaks enough about how we manage clean coal, how we manage gas, and how we marry the two. And remember, renewables are not base load. They need to be supported by either the battery storage or the gas or a base load, and we're not yet there. So yeah, for me, to be quite honest with you, Alex, I would say a combination between solar and gas would be a happy marriage.
All right, thank you very much. That very important to also take a note of. I love the point that you made about other countries now trying to impose this everything must be clean when they've already used fossil fuels to get to a certain level. And the reality is, a lot of countries on the continent are still gaining traction and still getting to where they need to. We have Martin's Iang that says, what directly inspired you to go on this journey of power production? He's curious about that.
Well, for me, I actually wanted to study oil and gas, and I did. I went to Aberdeen. But for me, the issue I always had was Africa ranking amongst the poorest economies in the world, whilst we had all these natural resources. So I wanted to understand what the issues were around that, which is what led me down my path of oil and gas. But I also, during that journey, saw the direct correlation between the lack of power and economic performance. Obviously, if you don't have electricity, your businesses do not function at the optimum that they should be. So I wanted to be part of addressing this issue. And I actually got into renewables before renewables were a thing in South Africa. And I worked with a law firm that lobbied for renewables to be introduced, and was part of the team that drafted the first renewable energy laws in South Africa. For me, what was inspiring was that I wanted to be part of the people that were solving this continent's issues, right? And trying to take us in the right direction. You do need a lot of passion and dedication. It's a long-term game. You know, it's not like oil and gas. I see the prices are so nice. Our prices are going down. You know, our tariffs go down, down, down each time we bid, and you guys are going up. You know, I'm seeing that it's $82 or something per barrel. But for me, it's really about, I mean, all jokes aside, it's really about being part of the solution to what this continent needs in terms of productivity.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. And it just again reminds me of something that Ola said when she spoke earlier. For those of you who may just be joining us, and we had Ola, the CEO of Daystar Power, chatting, and she said, you know, roll up your sleeves and get in, just get stuck in. It has to happen if you want to make an impact. And I love to hear that. We've got still some time. Fume asks or says, all my career life, I've worked in the upstream oil and gas sector, knowing the importance of climate change and a cleaner future. What are the fundamentals for a person seeking a career change that is getting into that renewable energy space? Asks Fume.
First of all, I would say it's about letting go of the love you have for oil and gas, because I have a few people in my team who are reformed oil and gas people, and they always tell me, oh, you guys are so disrespectful to the efforts we have made in offshore oil and gas, drilling that oil and risking our lives to do this job. And for me, to be quite honest, the skills are easily transferable, especially when you're looking at drilling offshore engineers, as well as the offshore wind engineering. So there's a nice marriage between offshore oil and gas and offshore wind, because it's the same environment, it's in the ocean, you've got you've got a context at least. The key thing, I mean, for me would be to do a bridging course. So for example, if you're an engineer, I would say try and pick up some electrical engineering courses, or, you know, or be self-taught, which is, I think the previous speaker also said, go online onto Google. There's so many, YouTube, Google, there's so many resources. Even I picked up a book which was called Engineering for Non-Engineers, you know, just to understand the terminology in the power sector, because at the end of the day, great that you know the commercial, but the commercial does not work without the technical. And also asking what you think are fundamentally stupid questions often are not, to be quite honest with you. And these are the questions that people may not be thinking about. So even how we went into this tracking of equipment. We lost money from our wind farm because there was a breakdown for 7 days that cost us. And I say to my team, there should be something we can do to track, you know, when equipment is malfunctioning before it breaks down, so that the orders of those, I mean, there's the key strategic parts that you have on site, but there's some parts that you don't have on site just because of cost, and you're basing it on the fact that there's a warranty on these things. But remembering that if there is a breakdown, it comes back to you. So for me, the first resources are Google, YouTube, and industry associations. So Power Africa is a great one, and I think you've got a speaker from Power Africa on this panel who can come on later. Attending the renewable energy events, the one positive thing about COVID is everything is online now, so you can at least you know, go and check out the speeches or the talks and the discussions without physically being there. And I would say read up and call the people that you have. I must say, this generation, well, I know I'm a millennial myself, but I'm saying this generation, especially now, from when we started, has a lot more resources than what I did. I started at least about 14 years ago. LinkedIn is such a great resource in terms of meeting people that you may want to link up with in the sector. So I would say start with those tools and see how far you get.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm talking about renewables and seeing how we can get more into that. Who should be at the forefront of championing that shift to renewables for a more rapid and urgent response to the continent's power demand? Is it the private sector or the government? And I feel like you touched on this a little bit earlier.
I think it's both of them. I mean, I always find it amusing that one thinks they can operate without the other. Government is there to create an enabling environment for business to function. Business is there to do business in order to employ the people that government doesn't employ and solve the problem that government needs solved, right? So these two work hand in hand. The one great thing that did happen in South Africa when the IPP program, that's the Independent Power Producer Program, that means when government decided to buy power from private sector, what they did, they got the banks in the room, they got the investors in the room, and government was in the room, and they said, right, what do we need to do to make this work? It was not a perfect power purchase agreement, but it was a bankable power purchase agreement. I often find that policymakers and government legislates without the people in the room that are going to be impacted by their policy or their law. So for me, it's very simple. If you can get in Nigeria, the Minister of Power, NBET, and the discos, and the transmission company, and the investors in the room, as well as the central bank, right? Because one of the key issues for investors in Nigeria is taking your money out. So getting those key people in a room and having an open and candid discussion around how we can solve this, there needs to be that political will, and also private sector must be willing to concede some certain things. It's not going to be a happy negotiation is not a perfect one.
I like that. Yeah, it's not a perfect one, but it does need to happen. So on a larger scale, then talking about solar and how that could really take root and is quite popular across the continent anyways, could solar energy be used on a larger scale to power entire cities? And are there countries where this has been done? And what other forms of clean energy can provide lasting solutions for the continent beyond just solar?
No, it definitely can be done. The nice thing about solar is over the past decade, we've seen the price of the materials coming down significantly. So the price and the cost of solar is cheaper. And one thing we do have in this continent is sunshine, a relatively good sunshine throughout the continent. So as a resource, the solar resource is there. And definitely there are large scale power projects that are solar powered. So in South Africa, for example, of that 7.8%, I think about 4% of that power is solar generation. So we've got 100 and above megawatts of solar per project. So they do power cities already. But solar is not, like I said, a base load power. Once there's no sun, there's no power. So you do need a backup. So government here is backing that up with battery storage. But again, like I said, the costs around battery storage is still at its early stages, is still quite costly. For me, I'd still maintain the combination of solar and gas, where the gas resources easily and cheaply available is the perfect union. Where it's not, we've seen hybrid plants where there's a combination of solar, wind, and battery storage. We saw that recently in the risk mitigation IPP program in South Africa. I think for Nigeria, the happy marriage between solar and gas would work wonders in the sense that you've got the sun, you've got the gas resource, but the gas pricing needs to still be attractive enough to gas producers to actually want to produce that resource for a sale perspective. In terms of the future of clean energy, for me, I honestly believe we shouldn't only focus on the power generation. Earlier, the speakers touched a bit on what it's like in the villages. I think it's so important to look at clean cooking mechanisms. Those are the, there's ways for clean cooking, biomass, as well as how we actually change the mentality of people at a grassroots level around clean energy, and also providing the support for them to do so. And it's a source of revenue. You've seen in East Africa, small countries where they're having those bags where they've got the solar panels where people charge their phones and use it as a means of extra income. So I think a holistic conversation needs to happen at a national level, right down to the grassroots level, to inform people about the importance of clean energy and how they can also generate an income from it, because people also are inspired when there's a return for them to do something or an incentive.
All right, thank you. Just before I let you go, I'm going to take one more question in from our fantastic viewers. Thank you guys for sending in all these questions. I see them, we're going through them at pace. Alex comes back to say that the continent struggles deeply with inadequacies from wealth to skills. And the one thing we do have is our resource base. So the pandemic has worsened this already dire situation, and our energy independence has never been more important. So could you break down in 4 or 5 concrete steps the way out?
The way out of
yes this struggle and the difficulty that how the pandemic has worsened the situation, the struggle with wealth, skills. For
me, to be quite honest, the way out is a national plan. And I know people will say, oh, you seem to place a lot of values on government, but I remember being at in a course in France a few years back, and we were told about how each country's strategy, how each leader had a strategy for their country, right? So, for example, we spoke about Mao and how he said, this generation will suffer so that the next generation of the Chinese can prosper and be rich. These are the sacrifices of this generation for the next generation. And then each country, as they went, had a strategy. Not a single African country was mentioned in that talk. And that disturbed me. I think that we are seeing pockets of that excellence, which is, let's say, Ghana's leader, President Nana, in his recent assertions around the exportation of cocoa and the actual beneficiation of those products within Ghana. So to answer the question around energy, what is the way out? There needs to be a national decision starting from the head of state in each country to say, right, for example, in Nigeria, I believe Nigeria could resolve its power issues within a year if the political will was there for it to do so. All it takes is a decision from the president to say, this is what is going to happen, and these are the funds being allocated to NBET to make this happen. Even if he doesn't allocate funding to NBET, what he could do is to say, I am scrapping away the restrictions and the requirements for generation license for anything, so anyone can generate from anything from 1 to 100 megawatts without requiring that. That would really go a long way in freeing up the use for domestic power. So for me, it starts with the political will, number one. It starts with understanding the financial requirements that would be required to make the political will happen, i.e., if you've got a national off-taker, how is this national off-taker going to be bankable? How is it going to be funded? Is the government going to put in the money? If government doesn't have the money, is it ready to borrow the money to make it bankable? Number two, how are we going to free up some of the power from the existing discos so that domestic use is not affected? I mean, we shouldn't be having 6-8 hours without power in Nigeria, and it's a simple fix by saying no more generation license requirements for any private use, 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts. Number three, it's by getting proper gas pricing to incentivize exploration and production companies in Nigeria to actually explore and produce gas. Nigeria takes one step forward and one step backwards on this gas pricing issue. So for South Africa, the right step has happened. The president has overruled the Minister of Energy and taken a decision to say no more generation licenses, 100 megawatts, up to 100 megawatts. Namibia has taken the same decisive action. What is required really is the political will to allow business to do what it does best, which is solve problems.
Okay, Linda, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. This has been an incredibly insightful period speaking with you. I'm going to move on now to our next speaker lined up. We have Femi Adeyemo, who is the founder and chief executive officer for Arnergy. Femi will be joining us now. Hello, Femi. How are you doing?
I am well today, Folu.
Excellent. How do you find the conversation so far? A lot is being shared. A lot is being shared.
I think we should just close the session, right? Because Olaido and Linda had done justice to the topic, so I don't think there is anything else to discuss.
There's always something else. We're in a learning space, so it's you and I and all of us. We are together. We are together. So I'm going to jump straight into my first question for you. Okay. It is a widely accepted fact that there can be no meaningful economic growth without access to affordable and reliable electricity supply. It's something we've discussed extensively today. Now, any economic response that doesn't have increased power generation, as well as an investment into grid and transmission infrastructure at the top of its agenda, well, that seems just bound to fail. So how does this inform the work that you do at Arnergy? And can you tell us a bit about that work that you do at Arnergy?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, the two speakers that spoke before me had done a lot of justice to the topic. But just to add the part of the value chain where we play, because over the last 8 years, we've apart from the utility scale, I think we've touched every other part of the value chain. And I'm talking of deploying systems as low as 20 watts. And Linda touched on technology, homegrown technology, and our youth building technologies locally, right? So those are some of the things that we've been able to bring into the picture. And when you talked about reliable and affordable, of course, that's also very critical, because as much as I don't want to discount the need for us to have the centralized form of energy, one of the things that we've also seen, and that is happening even in the developed world, whereby you have all of the grid and you are even able to generate more than what you need to consume. However, because of some sort of single point of failure, right, you might still experience some sort of total blackout. So for us as an organization, what we've been able to do is that reliability. And when we make it reliable, we want it to be as affordable as possible. So we've seen that over the years and with a lot of players, there had been more or less the missing middle. And we tag that the SMEs and the residential homes, like your home, young Nigerians that are just getting into professional, into professional experience, they being able to be productive. And if you look at what happened last year, I mean, everyone then had to switch from working from home, right? So if you don't have reliable electricity that is affordable, how can you be effective? You know, how can businesses be sustainable? And we're not talking of even the big industries that need maybe 300 megawatts air, but I mean, SMEs, they said, is the bedrock of the economy. So those are some of what we've been able to do. We develop a scalable 5 kilowatt system. We call it blue boxes, even though there are variants of it that is coming out now. It's somewhat getting popular in the market, and the box, developed locally, 100% local, manufactured in Lagos, so we didn't have to fly it in. And because of that, we're able to generate, a lot of employment, direct and indirect. The technology that has allowed us to be able to offer it or make the product affordable, because customers are able to pay for the system over 60 months. So that means they're able to pay on a monthly basis. And because of that, we're able to let either it is an SME or a residential home pay us on a monthly basis, and a month that they're probably spending more on diesel on a monthly basis. So those are what we've been able to do in the short form. I hope that makes sense to you. Folu, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah. Moving on now, considering the UN's universal value, how can we ensure that we create entities and what, that was a bit shaky there. So I was just saying that considering the UN's universal values for the 2030 agenda, that's leaving no one behind, how can we then ensure that we create energy solutions to alleviate poverty and create equal opportunities? And what role do you think millennials have to play in this?
Very, very great questions. I mean, the role that Millennial has to play, I think I won't overflog all what Linda have said on the role of government, right? So I will just align with everything Linda had said on that. But what roles can Millennial play? I think that, I mean, there is a huge opportunity here, especially when organizations like ours provide the opportunity, because it's one thing to have enterprising youths, smart youths like we have in Nigeria, but when the opportunity is not provided. And I mean, that's actually one of the reasons why I came back to Nigeria to find energy, because I happen to be part of the one of the, I mean, best success story out of Nigeria, and that's the telecom sector. So in the early 2000s, with less than 2 years experience in the telecom industry, I was able to travel abroad and began consulting. And I believe that distributed renewable energy has that potential. Linda mentioned how oil and gas was able to create that huge amount of job. In renewables, yes, I agree with her. The decentralized utility scale on the solar might not be able to do it, but the distributed, because I mean, you are installing almost every day and you're having to do maintenance on a daily basis. So the role that millennials can play, I mean, across the value chain, right? So one of the things that we've done is to create opportunities for youths across what we do. So, and I will try to put that in, I will bifurcate it in like 2 or 3 different buckets. One is opportunity that we have created for Nigerian youths that do not even need to be energy employees. And they could either be installers, similar to what Olaido mentioned. So we trained several Nigerian youths and they are freelance installers. Energy, with everything we do today, we don't install ourselves. And we were intentional about that. We wanted to create opportunities. So freelancers, I mean, there were even young Nigerians, and I'm telling you of Nigerians without university or even polytechnic education. I'm talking about technical educations, and then we're able to train them. They set up their own companies and they're installing today flawless installations. So that's one way that, I mean, millennials can help. The other part is on what we call, so we created a scheme called Solar Angel, which is, I mean, we've seen that solar is fantastic, but we need some angels to go tell Nigerians that, oh, this thing really works. So freelancers, they're not on our payroll, but by the side, they make money. I mean, some make as high as 100,000 naira per sale, right? So that's another one. Then I'm now talking about engineers. So embedded engineers, hardware engineers that are able to use their software skill and hardware skills to build products. Because the technology that is in our blue boxes or our 5 kilowatt modular boxes are built by Nigerians, right? And with that, we're now able to even go to the universities and say, okay, partner with a few universities. I mean, from say 400 or 300 level, they can come in, we'll train them so that that future that we want, we can begin to be the change that we want to see, not only in Nigeria, in Africa, and across the emerging markets, which is, I mean, our vision.
All right, thank you very much for that. So then moving on from that, what role do you think that technology has to play in achieving this? We've been talking throughout today about this sustainable energy mix for Africa's development. What is the role that tech has in that?
Absolutely, it's all around. I mean, energy, we call ourselves a clean technology company because all of what we do revolves around technology. So we have a full-blown software team that writes our softwares that allows customers to be able to, on their mobile phones, see what their energy consumption is. If they want to, I mean, if they're not at home for any reason and maybe someone at home is abusing the energy, they can shut it down remotely. So, and I had mentioned that we're able to allow up to 60 months payment. if we were not able to build technology that de-risk that, of course, we will not be able to do that because, of course, we had to bring in investors, and the investors had to more or less do due diligence on the technology. And then, and I'm talking of, tier one global investors, right? They looked at the technology and they were able to say, okay, impressive. And the fact that it's even local, young Nigerians, all less than 30-year-old, right, that built this. So that's all what we represent. And we won't be here if not for technology. So, and our technology is not only on the hardware side, even on the software side.
All right. Thank you. So with new opportunities, then come new skill requirements. And as investments that comes into to develop these key areas, new opportunities for job creations will also exist. So what are some of the skills that young people on the continent need to start thinking about and developing to help the continent's energy transition?
Very good. I can spend the next 30 minutes to discuss that. I'll try to make it short. Okay. So hardware, software, but I'll start with hardware. Hardware skills, and I'm talking of embedded systems, power engineering. Those are some of the skills that most Nigerian youth want to run away from. But indeed, that's where the opportunity is. I get people, sending me requests on LinkedIn. If you have that skill, you send me a message on LinkedIn, it's automatic. Recently, okay. There was a gentleman that reached out to me on LinkedIn and just sent a summary of what he's been able to do right in the university. And he was asking for an internship. That's a no-brainer, right? Because, those are jobs that, you likely find, in China or India, but like Linda mentioned, some of those countries, they were intentional, and they shut their door. They built the technology and the resources and the human capital that are required. Like I've said, I don't want to talk about government today, but millennials, the youth, Nigerian youth, just there is huge opportunity, and you just need to develop yourself, right? So hardware skills, embedded system engineering, power electronics, huge opportunity there. Of course, software, we have, a very huge distribution of Nigerian youth that are already doing software, but I will encourage them that even on the software side, full stack, right? I'm sure the guys, even the people that do not understand, go Google what being a full stack developer is. And as we speak now, we more or less continue to hire guys that have such skill on a rolling basis.
All right, thank you. Again, hello to all our viewers. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. We're discussing the future of energy. Before me right now, I have Femi, who is from Arnergy and is talking a little bit about tech and energy. Guys, if you have questions, please do send them in to me right now. The Q&A box is open for you, and I will be addressing those questions shortly as I round up my questions that I have for Femi. So how do we change the mindset of young Africans that is regarding renewable energy and the clean energy industry? Because that oil and gas money looks lit, people are like, cut soap for me, cut oil and gas soap for me, that's what we want. But with the lack of incentives, how do you think that we can shift that mindset to encourage more youth towards renewable energy?
Very, very interesting perspective. I think, and of course, it's there is no gainsaying that the soap of of oil and gas. The remuneration, it's exciting, right? But as much as I agree with Linda that it's not going to happen that soon, but we can already, the handwriting is already on the wall. With the big players, putting up mandates to go net zero, and maybe some sort of downsizing happening. The future of energy, that's what we're speaking today, right? It's pointing towards renewables. And that renewables, from where we sit, it's a combination of the generating sources and storage. And that's why, we continue to, spend a lot of resources and motivate Nigerian youth towards playing in that value chain. So I can tell you, that globally, and it's already happening in Nigeria too, when it comes to compensation is not what it used to be 3, 4, 5 years ago. Because, I mean, like Olaido mentioned, I mean, there's already a huge influx of private equity investments into the sector. And I think that for me, what is even making it to make a lot of sense is for us, as much as, yes, it is good, less pollution, carbon emission, capturing and all of that. But when it comes to the commercials, we've been able to prove that if energy comes to your business to deploy a solution, we can save you money from the first day. And it's now a function of doing that at scale. And as long as companies are able to do that at scale, profitability is there, then remuneration to employees will be good. And even for young Nigerians or Nigerian youth that want to do that themselves, I mean, start their own thing, the market is getting very exciting. I mean, I remember when I moved back 8 years ago, I mean, it was a big problem to even convince Nigerians that solar works. I recall, I mean, reading an article from someone very high in the Ministry of Power then that, yeah, solar is good, but the only problem is it cannot power appliances like refrigerator. So at that point, and I knew that my work was well cut out for me, that we had to do huge, we had to go on an education drive to even educate the masses. But all of that is changing. I mean, there are customers now that are able to get on camera to tell Nigerians or Africans how they're saving money by switching to solar. I mean, with a company like ours. So I think that the remuneration is getting better. And I mean, the only part that I see, it's up.
I love that. Femi said, challenge accepted. Let me show you guys. It can be done. There's money in here. You just have to be willing, again, to roll up your sleeves. I will always go back to that. We have a few questions that are coming through, so let me jump into the questions very quickly. We have an anonymous attendee that says, many thanks for all the insight. So much has been said about the challenge of infrastructure deficit. Their question is, what is the scale of infrastructure requirement in the renewable energy sectors when compared to the current situation? What advantages do renewable infrastructures have over the fossils? That's the question.
Very good question. From where I see it, because we are also a peculiar nation, so I will, as much as possible, de-emphasize utility scale deployment. And Linda had done just some justice to that. So from C&I perspective, and even, I mean, distributed systems, I would say that renewables have a lot of potential there because you can have millions of distributed systems. And if we compare to, I mean, some advanced or developed worlds, take Australia, for instance, there are more than 1 million deployments of decentralized solutions, even in Australia where the grid is stable. You know, so those are some of the advantages that I've seen. And also, I mean, we're talking about Millennial. It's not easy for a young Nigerian or a young African to say you want to acquire an oil block, you know, but in renewables, right? You can wake up one day and say, man, I want to do this, because the barrier to entry is somewhat, I mean, it's low, not somewhat low compared to the oil and gas place. So that portends opportunity for younger Nigerians, and definitely I see it as a low-hanging fruit, really, for us to achieve, I mean, whatever vision that we have set, either it's Vision 3030 or 2020 or whatever. That's
whichever of the visions.
Exactly.
All right,
Yeah.
all right. We have Imanche Adeyi, who says 63% of the population in Nigeria are below the age of 30. So in terms of renewables, resource is not a problem, but the skill to effectively function is. Now, Femi, I know you said you'll not talk about governments, but this question is about governments. So sorry. They said, what do you think that government can do to improve this area?
Okay. I mean, I knew that, of course, I mean, as an entrepreneur, it's not as if I run away from government. We can't do without government. So that's clear. Okay, so since that's a straightforward question, what can government do? All right, so I think that there are few initiatives that government has set up, right? And I mean, there is the recent, the economic, sustainability program, the ESP. I'm aware that government is trying to support to create, I don't know how many jobs now, but I know maybe some hundreds of thousands of jobs, right? So I think that some of those initiatives, if it is, okay, so I hope I won't get into trouble here. So if, as much as possible, it's always good to take inputs from people in the sector, right? And local content. I mean, I have a lot of friends that sit in DC. I mean, the investors ecosystem. I mean, we've raised private capital, foreign capital. So I have nothing against all of those. But when we're developing schemes and programs, if we want it to make the lasting impact that we are looking out for, it is important that government begin to listen to subject matter experts that have local content. I think if we take that and if we're intentional about that, these things are not rocket science. Between, several renewable energy companies that we have in Nigeria, there are thousands, tens of thousands of jobs that are already being created. We just need to leverage that and then support those organizations to take that to the next level. So that's what I would say is the role of government. The policies are already there. There are pockets of schemes already there, but the implementation, as most of what we've had in the past, is where I see that we're lacking.
All right, thank you. This next question is quite interesting, again, from Anonymous. How has the company been able to protect its intellectual property in Nigeria?
Very, very, very good question. I see that differently, really. And because I know that, again, I don't want to get in trouble here, but I'm not a learned person. So maybe Olaido would have been able to help me here. But I mean, knowing that, our judiciary system or a legal system, it's what it is. As much as possible, we want to get to the market first. So first to market and move fast. I mean, we have trademarks here and there on some of what we do, but to be honest, we've not really paid too much attention to patents or IP. As also much as possible, there are countries like China that do not really care about IP. Right? So I don't care about maybe people copying us. One of what we are hoping to do as a company is we want to be that catalyst, right? That young Nigerians can see and say, oh, energy is doing this. Can I do it too? So instead of me saying, oh, we want to protect what we've been able to build, can we more or less motivate 10 other energy or 50 other energy to begin to say, instead of flying everything from China, let's begin to build it in Nigeria and then create jobs. So that's the angle where we look at that from.
I like that. Be the catalyst, instigate the change. Let's get the people moving. It's provocative. Yeah. Kanye West knew what he was saying. Just to round up our session with you before we move on, and up next we'll be talking to Adaku Fere. We've got a two-parter question here and sort of comment. Again, Alex is really busy in the comment section. Thank you very much, Alex, for joining us. He says 80 million people have no access to the grid, and renewable models are still significantly out of reach for 50% of Nigerians. That is from an affordability perspective. So first of all, what role can millennials play in closing this gap when it comes to access to power? And second, also what power purchasing agreement models might drive this kind of growth? Because ultimately that's the endpoint for most investors.
Yeah, so those are
like a
three
quick couple of
questions
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, so those are like three questions in one. So I think there was a question around affordability, right? The 50% Nigerians that are still not able to afford it. So until January this year, we were only offering up to 36 months on our lease to own system. And we look at the pricing. In fact, as at then, our smallest product was a 5 kilowatt product. And we look at the 36 months, and it was clear to us that we will be cutting out a lot of Nigerians, a lot of millennials. So what we did was to introduce a new product, which more or less speaks to, the 3 kVA type of product, and then also increase the tenor. So that means up to 60 months. So with that, a lot of millennials, we have millennials, Nigerians that are not married, that are single, that have been able to afford the system because of that. So I think those are some of the things that I believe needs to be done. Longer term, longer tenor. You wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I need to chip in real quick because a question came in earlier. So and this is a good time to ask it because Timishole actually said, that 60 months is an impressively long tenure for Nigeria. So who is financing such tenures and such risk? Is it DFIs, OEMs, or are people effectively paying very high interest rates on a year-on-year basis? And that's a very valid question because 60 months is, you are doing well.
Thank you. So like I said, we want to be the catalyst, because some of what we've seen is if you want to more or less create, it's more or less the market creating innovations that we're trying to do here. And I can tell you when we started, no bank wanted to touch it. We were on panels and some commercial financial institutions will say, oh, they will only offer, they can't offer anything more than maybe 18 months, but now we're already seeing some of them from 18 months, they're saying, okay, maybe 36, maybe 4 years. So if energy did not do it, they probably would think, oh, it's too risky, So to the question, who is financing it? Of course, we had to kickstart it or jumpstart it with our own equity.
Okay.
Right? To be able to prove that indeed this can work. And I also saw a question, okay. Yeah, exactly. So we put our money where our mouth is. And I saw questions around risk. What we also were able to do, and some of the questions you ask on what is the opportunity? We were able to, of course, partner with one of the credit bureau to at least check, are these customers, we normally rate the customers, but beyond that, we also built an in-house algorithm that is able to take whatever the credit bureau gave us and some of the data points that our software engineers have been able to build. And we can tell that, okay, this customer with maybe just 2 years professional experience, not married, will be able to afford the system and pay over the next 60 months. So if no one is doing it, the financial institutions are saying, no, every Nigerian is risky. If you don't work with organizations like Orlando, you can't get loan and all of that. We're going to be cutting out a lot of millennials, and it was just very clear to us that, if no one is going to do it, energy has to do it. And that's part of why, the company was founded in the first instance.
Femi Ademo, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you. Energy in the building. Thank you. Up next, I'm going to welcome Adaku Ufere to the conversation. She's an energy attorney and Deputy Chief of Party USAID and Power Africa West Africa Energy Program. Adaku, welcome. I love we're matching in red, so this is already a beautiful moment for me. How are you doing? Can you put on your mic for me? We can't hear you at the moment. You seem to be muted still.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're in the building. Yes, welcome.
I'm so sorry. Speaker was muted, laptop was not, technical problems. Clearly, I'm not that type of millennial.
Yeah, not Gen Z. It's okay. Millennial, is, yeah.
So small. Yeah, I'm so glad I got to sit through everyone's contributions. It's been amazing listening to the different perspectives.
Yeah, it really has been. So let me jump straight into it with you. We've spoken a lot about policies, regulation, the role of government, and I wonder for you, what kind of policies and incentives do you think that government needs to put in place in order to encourage more young people in aiding this energy transition that we keep speaking of, and how can we make these a new reality?
I mean, yeah, so before we get into the policies and incentives, and I think Linda mentioned this, we have to think about the fact that an energy transition will shrink some economic sectors while expanding others. So a whole crop of people will lose their current jobs. So the hope is that expanding sectors will absorb the majority of the shrinking counterparts. So you need deliberate action to avoid young people facing significant costs while you're trying to help them. So there will also be a need for the youth to overcome social and cultural barriers like lower literacy, lower access to finance, education, access to land, mobility. You also need to ensure that if you're doing skills training, it matches the opportunities in emerging sectors. So for example, you need to adapt targeted skills development for the youth labor force to prevent a mismatch between the skills opportunities that already exist. So now we can do all of that. It's not happening in a silo. You can do all of that while simultaneously creating a formal structure to aid the energy transition. So through vehicles like regional and national action plans. So I know Burkina Faso has a national action plan called Strategy for Accelerated Growth and Sustainable Development. Now, what this does is that aims to improve income distribution and reduce vulnerability to poverty. And it does this by promoting sustainable farming and agriculture. So far it has created opportunities for the youth in forestry, fishing, and conservation. And the IMF has actually projected that the plan will grow Burkina Faso's agricultural value by 10.8% in 3 years. So it has a two-pronged approach. It's helping the economy, it's helping the youth, win-win. Then also stakeholder engagement strategies. I know it seems like, like really low hanging fruit, put together a bunch of stakeholders in a room, but it actually works. When you have people across all the value chains and the people who can learn from them, put them in the same room, form a working group, just figure out and talk in real time about how can we move forward. That also helps. So I know the National Planning Commission in South Africa, they're planning a stakeholder engagement process to support a transparent and participatory process for designing a just energy transition. So this is supposed to determine the future of their national coal industry, for one.
Okay.
And one of probably, I think, the most important is skills development in entrepreneurship. And for countries like in Africa, which are relatively underexplored as opposed to the global countries, I think ecotourism is a huge, unidentified sector, especially in Nigeria. It's just not Lagos and Abuja. There's so much. When I see pictures of other states in Nigeria, I'm like, wow, we have all these things and they're just lying there, unused. And you have others, there's so many other sectors: agriculture, food production, construction, transport, renewable energy, recycling. All of this can be supported through entrepreneurship training. And you're not just stopping at classroom training, yeah? So you're helping to develop business plans. You're giving these people access to technology and information. You're helping them building, if they have existing business plans, you're helping to green it, and training them on personal agency, giving them access to coaches, mentors, and networks.
Amazing. Thank you for that. So moving on now, we've got an idea from this conversation and all the things that have been shared before about how much energy Africa needs to close the energy gap, but how much in terms of investments needs to be injected into this ecosystem, and where can that investment come from?
I think because I have an oil and gas background, I'm an oil and gas lawyer, and I made this pivot to power sector about 3 years ago. I am not, like Linda would say, still hooked on oil and gas, no, but I have the benefit of being part of the two sectors, and I see where some people who are championing clean energy might not really see that how, to easily make that bridge between fossil fuels and clean energy. So for the amount of investment, it's not as straightforward as saying, Africa needs X amount, and then, yeah, we're all saved. And there's all this focus on Africa and its future in clean energy, when currently Africa, like the whole continent, is responsible for less than 2% of the world's carbon emissions.
Sorry, please. Go back. Say it again so the people in the back can hear it.
Africa is responsible for less than 2% of the world's carbon emissions. So we're not the problem here. So let's set that stage, first of all, that we get all this advice, do this, Africa, do this, and then they're ignoring the countries that are actually producing the emissions that is causing the problems. So now for a dollar figure, there's varying information on how much is needed to close the energy gap. I know an Africa Energy Outlook report from 2019 stated that between 2019 and 2040, cumulative investments of, I think it was 2.5 or 2.6 trillion will be required. And then an international energy think tank went further and also concluded that, with appropriately funded, developed executive policies, all the nice words that make it seem like, okay, this is how you guys move forward. And you think it's easy. And they posit that we can close the energy gap and also become the first continent to boost our economy largely through the use of low carbon energy sources. And you read that as someone in the industry and say, how? There's 592 million Africans currently without access to energy. Clean, dirty, whatever form, they don't have it, know. And they're saying there should be, and international agencies are saying there should be no investment in fossil fuel supply after 2021, this year. There should be no new sales of fossil fuel boilers by 2025, and 60% of all car sales should be electric by 2030. Right, so how is Africa supposed to achieve this when we don't have universal energy access, to electricity or clean cooking by 2030? And also trying to figure out how much we need relies on unprecedented investments in renewables, which we don't have because the majority of investments in Africa are still in fossil fuel projects. That will require probably about $5 trillion annually. And I like how I'm just throwing out these numbers, like they are not amazing.
It's nothing. It's nothing to a boss. It's okay. We know.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, $5 trillion. And I think that's even underestimated. And you ask, so how does this funding for these renewables, some bodies think Africa can raise it ourselves, that we can raise it ourselves. Some say, oh no, Africa can make that money on its own. And they highlight situations like in the DRC. The DRC constitutes 2/3 of the world's cobalt production, which is a crucial element in batteries, right? And they also mention that South Africa produces 70% of global platinum, which is used in hydrogen fuel cells. So it's like, the thinking is that as the energy transition gains momentum, the demand for cobalt and platinum will place Africa in a very influential market position. Now, this completely ignores the fact that these industries are not controlled by indigenous Africans. A lot of them are foreign. Almost 100% of the revenue from cobalt does not make it back into the DRC. Majority of the mining companies in the DRC are foreign, their local employees vastly exploited, the communities in which they house these mines are environmentally destroyed. So a ramping up of global demand for cobalt is not going to help the DRC, it will decimate it. So how are we supposed to use that money and then put it into our renewables? And yeah, so to even come close to any such investment, and I don't know if you've asked this question yet, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, it will require like a cocktail of different funding options. And I know the previous speakers have spoken about this. But the one I'm really interested in is something called green bonds.
Say that again.
Green bonds. So like
Green
just
bonds,
regular
yes.
government bonds, but green bonds.
Yeah.
And green bonds they're financial instruments, but here the proceeds are invested exclusively in green projects that generate climate or other environmental benefits. So about a month ago, I wrote an article recently about the growing popularity of green bonds in Africa. The Africa Development Bank created a green bond program to help Africa gradually transition to green growth. The West African Development Bank launched a 750 million euro bond issue in January. South Africa launched one, Morocco, even Nigeria has launched 3 green bonds. And I know a popular refrain is that there's little information on the projects funded by these green bonds, but in Nigeria alone, the Rural Electrification Agency launched a program called the Energizing Education Program, and it was funded through a Nigerian government green bond. And so far, they've commissioned solar projects in about 5 universities in the country. So I feel like green bonds, they might not, save the entire, continent, but they will operate in a kind of symbiotic way. So the bonds issuance will fund clean energy projects, and then countries will make money through the bonds to fund more clean energy projects, and everybody wins.
All right, thank you for that. Afolabi is echoing my feelings. He says, insights, Adaku, speak on, speak on. Questions have started coming in, guys. Please do send in your questions. I'm gonna ask my last question to Adaku, and then I'm just gonna go through your questions and then we'll round up. Adaku, I wanna know, how do we change the mindset of young Africans, again, regarding renewables? I know we keep speaking on this because it is something that has to keep being spoken about, because the oil and gas industry, again, it just seems more attractive. You started out in that space. You know the vibes. You know how people end up in that space. How can we shift that mindset from your perspective? What do you think would encourage more young people into the renewable energy space?
Yeah, oil and gas has great PRO. Like, it really does. I mean, when I first got into oil and gas was when we had a female minister for petroleum. It was the first Minister of Petroleum. And then, I just found that really inspiring. And then you find about how much money you can make in oil and gas. And I was like, yeah, I was working as an intellectual property lawyer in a law firm in Lagos. And I was like, I just applied to the University of Aberdeen for a master's in oil and gas law, told them deuces and was on my way. And I was in oil and gas from that day, so it has really, really great PR. So how to shift the mindset of the youth to encourage them to get into the clean energy industry, which is not as pervasive. I think obviously to create learning opportunities. So a lot of people still don't know what things like the energy transition or even clean energy mean. So the way we are flooded with information about the oil and gas sector, there needs to be a parallel push for renewables and clean energy. And here in Power Africa, we have a group called the Women in African Power, and they provide resources, knowledge exchange opportunities, well, particularly for women in energy, but for a lot of young women in energy. So they actually have a program called Young Women in African Power, which I participated in before I ever started working for Power Africa. I was working for a previous law firm as head of the energy practice in Equatorial Guinea. And I went for this program called the Young Women in African Power. I was fully oil and gas, had some power experience, but I was like, you know what? I actually told them in my application, I'm really interested in energy, in the intersection of energy and gender, in clean energy, and I believe you guys will teach me how to become a thought leader in this space. I had purely oil and gas before then. And they did. I participated in 2018, and it was a huge reason for my pivot into power. Like, after that program, I literally got everything I needed to be able to harness this knowledge I'd been looking for, the opportunity I'd been looking for. And less than a year later, I got my first job in energy, right? So it's called, if anyone is looking for it, it's called the Young Women in African Power. They have the same name, I think, on LinkedIn and Facebook, probably. You can find it. It's an open group. You can apply. Anyone who's in power or wants to learn about power can apply to join. They post job opportunities, articles, things like that. It's a lot of resources just out there on the web for young people to find. You can also follow the Power Africa handle on Twitter. It's called Power Africa US on Twitter, and Power Africa on Instagram. And they also, they post a lot of information about, energy, the different projects we're working on in Africa, different strides countries are making. And I think it was Ola or Linda that said about, just Google, information is out there. Yeah, so
they both did.
It's as simple as just following all these people. And also the Sustainable Energy for All, and this is still under learning opportunities. They had a Sustainable Energy for All Youth Summit. And I don't know if you know, a Nigerian woman is a CEO. Her name is Damilola Gumbi. She was a former MD of the Renewable Rural Electrification Agency in Nigeria. Now she heads SE for All. And they had a Sustainable Energy for All Youth Summit, I think it was earlier this year. And it was for youth who were interested in climate change, clean energy, and energy transition. And the incentives they offered were like 3 prongs. There was knowledge. You were able to get into breakout rooms with energy sector leaders and learn directly from them. They had virtual academic and job fairs. So they had universities like Columbia, Birmingham coming to talk to people about clean energy courses, the way Aberdeen and Dundee spoke to us all 10 years ago about oil and gas courses. They had career fairs where companies actually came and told young people, this is the kind of roles we have, this is how you can interview and get these jobs. Then they also had I think it was a competition where you could win $2,500 for the best clean energy proposal. And, it was a huge success. And I'm not sure like a lot of people knew about that because I kept retweeting and putting out information so young people perceive this exists. So that's one. Another way is to give them something to aspire to. So whether we like it or not, representation matters. The face of, climate youth issues now is Greta Thunberg, the Swedish girl. And she's described as having sparked this global movement for young people demanding greater action from government to fight climate change. And this is in 2018. But before Greta started, there was a Nigerian girl called Jennifer Uchendu. She runs a company called Susty Vibes, which basically is the same thing, championing ecofeminism, sustainability, climate change. And Jennifer has been doing this for years. I met her when I did the Mandela Washington Fellowship in 2018. And this is someone, young African girl championing ecofeminism, but then she's not, exactly the right face, the way another type of face would be, more palatable, more global, more international. And so if there's a young girl in Mombasa, Kenya, who, is interested in climate change, Greta doesn't really represent her. She needs someone who looks like her. So having, young African women, men getting involved, being able to have access to world leaders, speaking on the global stage is a great way to, give the youth something to aspire to and say, okay, I can be that person. I can do that. Like I can get involved in this industry.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, I'm going to jump into the questions. People are sending in questions. Goyega Olorunfemi says, Adaku, what is your take if Africa decided to make use of what it has for improved industrialization? What do you foresee as the legal implications with how we signed up to multiple treaties and parties? Also, how do we swim towards or against this tide of a rush to renewables? Those are Goyega's questions. Okay. So using what it has for industrialization, legal implications considering signatory to treaties, and this rush to renewables, or what he thinks is a rush.
So again, Africa is not a monolith. Legal implications will vary by country. I know we're all signed up to different regional, national, international, global, and it's not the signing up, it's the implementation. We're not implementing any of these different acts and treaties and things we're signing up to. The legal implications are, you have, like I said, you have to be on a case-by-case basis. What do this country's laws say? What does this, regions, because it's not just the country you're dealing with the region itself. Say most West African countries are aligned with the West African Power Pool, or like ECOWAS or ERERA. So you're having to go through all those different, groups to figure out, okay, how do we now implement this? So it's not a question I can answer unless I have an actual case and I'm analyzing on itself.
And the consideration whether or not you sign a treaty, has it been adopted into national law, into local law? If it hasn't been, it really has no application on a national basis. But thank you for that. Anonymous attendee says, how do we navigate this green financing, and which projects can provide the most impact for Nigeria and Africa as a whole? Green financing, navigation of that.
How do we navigate it is basically what we've been talking about here, providing the information, providing the opportunities, giving people the access to finance, to knowledge, technology. And as for the kinds of projects, it depends obviously on the renewable factors that are available in your country. So Nigeria's solar is great because we have a lot of sunlight, right? And I think because of obviously power issues are one of our biggest problems, harnessing solar to me is the best way forward in Nigeria. I would have said biomass because we do have a lot of waste, but Nigeria's waste is very wet, if that makes sense. Say like in the West, when you order something from Amazon and you order like a pencil, Amazon sends it in this huge box with like lots of paper. So the trash in the US is dry because there's a lot of paper. But in Nigeria or in Africa, it's wet, it's food, it's animal droppings, it's things like that. So it doesn't burn very well as opposed to, which is why I'd say biomass, but because we have mounds of trash in Africa, I would have thought biomass would be a great way to go. But say in Cote d'Ivoire, there's a project coming up where they're actually using cocoa waste to make energy. So it's like you use what you have around you. You have, one of the world top producers of cocoa. You've taken out the pods, everything that's going to make the chocolate. What do you do with the waste? Use it for power.
All right, Adaku, thank you. Moving on to our final question, actually, Ejiro Kunle Hassan asks or says, I appreciate that Adaku mentioned that Africa's emissions are not near the highest in the world. No, we're insignificant. But goes on to say, how important to Africa's energy future is it for the continent to take charge of its narrative? Because I believe, he says, that there is no one size fits all for energy, but that is what is pushed.
Yeah, and that's why this global solution, I'm not on board with it, because it just says everybody do this, forgetting that everyone has a different problem. I don't think it's possible. So yes, Africa does need to take control of its narrative. Africa, and I think it was OPEC actually responded to that report that I said was released recently, saying we should reach net zero emissions by what was it, 2050, and OPEC responded to that and was like, nah. I mean, I think Saudi Arabia, what country said, oh, you're living in La La Land? Like, that was the official communication back to the body that it's not possible. We can't do this. And he's maybe a bit rude, not very diplomatic. But
savage. A millennial wrote that response.
Yeah. It's not just, okay, yes, we'll do as you said. And then you start shooting yourself in the foot, trying to achieve these unachievable targets. So say the truth. People don't even have access to any sort of energy, much less clean. So let's say this is what Africa can do. This is how we can get there. These are the means we'll try to use to get there. But, solve your own problems. Let's solve ours. But thanks for the guidance.
Excellent. We got one more question that snuck in there, the deadline. Sakina Adeyemi says, what's the feasibility of biogas in Nigeria? Even though you've just spoken about that. Can you comment on it?
I just spoke on that. I don't know. That's my problem. Like I said, the trash is there. We have a lot of refuse everywhere. We are burning it, and basically it's, where it's ruining in the air with the fumes. I know when I lived in, because now I live in Ghana, when I lived in Nigeria, you drive past down from Third Mainland down to 7-Up. On the left, there was this huge mound of refuse that's been burning since I was a child. I don't know where it's from, and what if you use that instead, and used it to power energy? So, but then I'm thinking, because of the wet issue, that might be the problem why we haven't harnessed biomass. I don't know. But yeah.
Right. Thank you for that. Adaku, thank you so much for your time. And I just want to say we have come to the end of this conversation. And I really want to thank all the speakers, Adaku, Femi, Linda, Olaido. You have all been so helpful, so informational, and so knowledgeable in your areas. And truly, this has been a great resource for myself personally, and I'm sure for everyone who's watching as well. Just before I let everyone go, I would like to let you know that Owando has created a report, which is a pre-feasibility study assessment of opportunities within Nigeria's renewable energy space, okay? It encompasses preliminary research to analyze, determine, and select the most technically and economically viable business scenarios for further studies and adoption. Now, if any of you out there would like to receive this report, I would love for you to please register your interest in using the link, which will come up as soon as this session ends. So a link is coming up in just a bit. It contains a survey, and you can also signify your interest in that pre-feasibility report. Also, don't forget to join the LinkedIn group, guys. Let's collaborate. It's called A Millennial Conversation, and the link is also now in your chat box. So if you'd like to get a heads up on more conversations like this, also follow Owando PLC on all the relevant platforms. And do remember that Owando has been doing phenomenal things in spite of the pandemic and the confluence of unfortunate events that followed. The hashtag Humans of Owando came together in April 2021, months ago, to launch a response to the hunger challenges in Nigeria. That's TAP, the aggregator platform. So think about it. Approximately 87 million Nigerians live in extreme poverty, and approximately 50% of our population cannot afford to eat food. And despite the efforts of the NGOs and the many charities that exist to provide palliatives to those in need, there is a huge gap that still exists between those in dire need and those eventually reached and fed. So TAP to support charities in bridging this gap, one community at a time, and bridge that gap to reach all. It's very important. Also, please make sure that you join the #Nigeria One Community at a Time.org. They're on, even though we can't access Twitter right now. Thank you. I've been your host for the Millennial Conversation. I am Folu Storms. You can find me on social media on that handle. But that's it for now. Thank you so much. Don't forget to join us on all the social media platforms. And it's a goodbye from me.